We've chosen both speakers to represent each faith sort of adequately. They're both very professionally, so we hope they'll represent everyone's views adequately. I'm sure they will. I'm sure they'll do a great job. There'll be plenty of time for questions, and I'll just hand over to Craig, our moderator.
Thank you very much indeed. Are we leaving this on right the way through the debate? Is this going to be flashing?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Hope we won't be put off by that. As you heard, my name's Alan Craig. My job is to moderate, and therefore my job is to ensure that we have a stimulating, respectful, fun time this evening. Fun but serious, because we're obviously raising very serious questions and very serious issues. I'm fortunate because I know both of the debaters tonight. Jay over here on my left, who's representing the Christian case, is like Sammy over here on my right, who's representing the Muslim case. They're both American citizens, so we're faced by the Americans tonight. Jay himself has studied Islam for 3 decades, he tells me. He's lived in the UK for 2 decades, and he's undertaken something like 50 Christian-Muslim debates in his career. So I think many of you were introduced and said he's professional. I'm not sure he's paid to do it, but certainly he enjoys doing debates. Sammy is currently studying over here, on this side, is currently studying for a master's degree in politics, and he has done debates in the UK and in the USA. And they have both debated with each other before, so it's not a new experience for them. You've heard the rules, and it's my job to make sure both of you stick with the rules, and also that my job to make sure the speakers stick with the timing. Let me just explain to you the progress of what we're going to do tonight, and make sure I get it right as well. Jay is going to go first. It's been agreed that Jay is going to speak first, and he's going to speak for 25 minutes, after which Sammy will speak for 25 minutes. Then Jay will have 10 minutes for rebuttals, to rebut what Sammy said, and Sammy will have 10 minutes to rebut what Jay said. We're then going to have a break for 10 minutes or so. Is it 10 minutes or 15 minutes? Something like that. I'll make up my mind at the time. We'll give it a chance for a comfort break or a cup of tea or a glass of water or whatever you want to do. Then we're going to come back and we'll have 40 minutes for questions. And this is your chance. And I'll be looking to you for questions. I don't want you to preach. I don't want you to give statements. I want questions from you. And we'll do that in the order of, I will ask for a question first for, say, Sammy, and then a question for Jay. And we'll go on alternately throughout that 40 minutes, providing there are sufficient questions. If Sammy is asked a question, he'll have 3 minutes to respond to your question, and Jay will have 1 minute to respond and rebut what Sammy has said. And when a question goes to Jay, it'll be exactly the same. 3 minutes for Jay to answer your question, and Sammy will have 1 minute to rebut what Jay says and to answer your question as well. After that 40 minutes, we'll have 5 minutes each. They'll sum up 5, and it'll be reverse order. Sammy will go first, and Jay will go last, and then we'll all shake hands and go home. Okay, does that sound all right? Everybody happy with that? Everybody clear? It's also my job to ensure fairness all round, so everybody's going to get a fair share to ask their questions. Fairness between the main debaters here, and make sure that everybody feels they've had their fair share, and there's no bias one way or the other. A level playing field is the idea of these debates. So that's what we're going to do. My most tricky one will be to make sure I'm exactly fair on the timing, and that they get exactly the same time down to almost the last second. Well, I'm now going to start, and I'm going to ask Jay to come up here, and he is going to have 25 minutes to address the question, who is the better model for society today, Jesus or Muhammad? Jay Smith.
Well, thank you. It's terrific to come back to Kingston again. I think I've been here maybe about 5 times now. There were different faces back then, a whole new generation of students. I was here last year. Some of you I recognized from last year when I debated Abdullah Andalusi. And it's great to see such a good turnout tonight. And I'm assuming that there are people here who are Christians, who are Muslims, or even those of no faith. Because this is a good question. This is the kind of question that I would expect those of you to continue, because what we do this evening is basically get you to speak to each other and continue these kind of dialogues, these kind of debates amongst yourself. And the question we've asked is, who is the better model for today, Jesus or Muhammad? I'm going to try to persuade you that Jesus is that better model. Samuel will do a great job of trying to persuade you that Muhammad is that better model. But before we even talk about model, we need to define what we mean by model. And I suggest that a model that we're talking about tonight is not just anybody or not just everybody. The model we're looking at is a man of God. Who is the better man of God? Now, interestingly, when you look at Jesus and Muhammad, they both claim to be men of God. They both claim to be prophets. I think that's not in doubt tonight. Muhammad did a lot more than Jesus did as far as many different, certainly he certainly participated in many different areas. He was more than a prophet. He was also a politician. He was more than a politician. He was certainly a leader of men. He also got married. He had children. He was certainly in charge of a theocratic state. He was in charge of an economy. So in that respect, it would be easy to say, hands down, Muhammad is the better man because he was involved in so many different areas of life. Jesus never did get married. He was not here to do that. When Jesus came to earth, when God came to earth as Jesus, he was very clear that he was here for one reason and one reason alone, and he was here to confront the religious powers, not the political powers. He spent no time confronting political powers. Have you noticed that? He didn't confront the Romans. He didn't confront Herod, even when his cousin John was in prison, there in Herod's prison. And when the disciples of John came to ask Jesus for his help, and when they came to ask him what he was going to do, look at his reply. His reply was, go back to John and tell him what I do. I've come to heal the sick. I've come to give sight to the blind. His ministry was not to start a theocratic state. He was not like Moses or any of the other previous prophets, and he certainly was not like Muhammad. And I think on that one item we need to really gear our question today. So who is the better man of God? Not who's the better politician, who's the better husband, or who's the better father. Because Jesus didn't even accept or would not even be in those categories. And when I look at Jesus as a man of God, then I've got to ask, what is it we know about him? Now we have two different scriptures, we have two different texts that we can see Jesus in. This one, the Bible, that talks about the Jesus that I know, the Jesus that I love, the Jesus that I'm going to try to introduce you tonight, and the Jesus that I would hope that you would also follow too. Because the Jesus I see here is really the man for today. He's the man for every day. He is, I would suggest, the universal for all of mankind, for all places, and all people. The man I see here, Muhammad, I have a lot of problems with. I'm not going to talk too much about Muhammad in this first presentation. I'll probably come more back to him in the rebuttals. But certainly, the Jesus that I see here also bothers me. Because the Jesus I see in this book is not the Jesus I know. Even his name bothers me. Isa. That's not the right name. I don't know if you know this or not, but Jesus does have a name in Arabic. The name in Arabic for Jesus is Yeshua. And every Christian, every Arab Christian always knew that name. And for 2,000 years, that has been the name in the Arabic Bible. The name for Jesus is Yeshua. So why is he called Isa here? That's not Yeshua. And you can see by asking that question that we're starting to get at what I believe is a perversion of the Jesus. This is not the real Jesus because I pretty much know, I think I know where that name comes from. I would suggest that name probably comes from the sources that we find about this Jesus. Because when you look back at this Jesus, or the Isa that is here, he's very little like the Jesus we see here. He spends a lot of his time as a child. In fact, there's quite a few references to him as a child. And the Jesus that I see here, the Isa that I see here, takes some clay and forms it into birds and blows on it and flies up into the air. I don't see that in my Bible. When his mother is hungry, he sits under a palm tree and has the palm tree shaken and so that he can feed his mother and also so that she can be fed from the water that's at the base. In Surah 19, ayah 22 to 26. When I say surah, I mean book. When I say ayah, I mean verse, for those of you who are not familiar with the terms. The Jesus I see here also spends a lot of his time as an adult denying his divinity. And that concerns me. Because he's not a model of a prophet, a true prophet, if he spends all his time denying that which he knew that he came to do. And most important, the Jesus I see here fails in his most important task. To die and rise again. Because the Jesus I see here, this Jesus, over 300 prophecies spoke about that one event. And all of them are fulfilled in the person I see in this book. He came not just to give us a better way, not just to be a model for us, though he was a great model. He came to do something specific. He came to die on the cross and rise again. We'll come back to that. Let's go back to this book and look at the Issa that I see here. Now, in spite of all that, in spite of what I just told you, the Jesus that I see here, the Issa, the name, the problem with that name, and the fact that almost all the references that I see from this book can be traced back to Syriac sources, because almost all the stories that I see about Jesus can be traced back to other areas which are borrowed from those sources. And the name for Jesus in those Syriac sources is Iesu. And when you take Iesu and put it into Arabic, then you get the Issa. It looks like even the name has been borrowed. And what I would ask, and I've asked this for many Muslims for many years, where is that name Issa in Arabic before the Quran? It doesn't exist. Which seems to suggest we've got the wrong Jesus. Despite all that, let's go back and let's ask another question. What about the Jesus that we do see here, and what about his place in this book vis-a-vis Muhammad? Is there a comparison? Can we do a comparison within this book itself? Can we look back at the Quran? It's not my authority. It's not Christians' authority, but it is for you Muslims who are here. It is your authority. Even when you look at the Jesus that is here, what is interesting to me is that the Jesus that is here, though his name may be wrong, though maybe the stories have been borrowed, yet despite all of that, he is still better than Muhammad. Greater than Muhammad. How do I know? Let me just share with you 4 verses. 4 verses in the Quran from 2 different surahs. Surah 19, ayah 20. Surah 3, ayah 46. Surah 3, ayah 49. And I'll end with Surah 19, ayah 19. Let's just look at those 4 verses, and let's look and see the Issa that we see here, and compare them with Muhammad. Let's just do that. I'm starting with the Quran. I'm not going to my Bible, because Muhammad's not in that Bible, so there's no way we can make a comparison there. Despite what many Muslims tell me, he is not referred to for one very good reason, because he's not in the prophetic line. No one was really waiting for him. But the Jesus that we do see here in the Quran, let's just compare him with Muhammad very quickly. In Surah 19, ayah 20, we see that Jesus was born of a virgin. That means that he had a miraculous birth, something special about his birth. No other person I know is born of virgins. Virgins just don't conceive, at least not in my world they don't. But in the Quran, he is born of a virgin. I've asked many Muslims, why is that important? And they don't know why that's important, other than the fact that that's something special. Why is that special? To understand why that's special, you need to come back to us. In fact, in your Quran, it does say, in Surah 21, ayah 7, and 1094, if you have any questions, come back to the people of the book, come back to us. If you have any questions, don't even argue with us. In Surah 29, 46, it says, don't argue with us, we will tell you why is it he had to be born of a virgin. And the answer is right there in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. In Isaiah 7:14, Isaiah the prophet says, for this shall be a sign to you. That means wake up, people. That includes Muslims and Christians and everybody else in this room. This will be a sign. A virgin will conceive. And when a virgin conceives, we're to wake up, we're to pay attention, because at this time a virgin will conceive and bear a son, not a daughter but a son. That's very important. And his name shall be called Emmanuel, God with us. So when a virgin conceives, God is with us. This doesn't happen naturally. This does not happen commonly. Only one time in the whole history of mankind has a virgin ever conceived. Both Muslims and Christians know who that person was, and that was Mary. That is when God is with us. That's the first thing that I see that's unique. Now, was Muhammad born of a virgin? No. Was Muhammad born uniquely? No. He was born like everybody else. Nothing special about his birth. So already in his birth, you see Jesus is unique, is different. In Surah 3, ayah 46, from the cradle, Jesus, it says, or Isa, it says, was able to talk, was able to speak as an infant. Could Muhammad speak as an infant? And the answer is no. But Jesus could, or Isa could. In Surah 3, ayah 49, 3 verses later, he takes some clay, fashions them into a bird, blows on them, and with the power of Allah, it says, he was able to then create those birds, those clay birds were able to fly into the air. So he could create out of nothing in the power of Allah, it says in the Quran. Was Muhammad able to create anything in the power of Allah? And the answer is no. Right after that, in the same verse, it says he was able to give sight to the blind. Could Muhammad give sight to the blind? And the answer is no again. He was also able to heal the lepers. Could Muhammad heal the lepers? No, not at all. And then it says that he could resuscitate the dead. That's all found right there in that one verse, Surah 3, ayah 49. So there are 6 things that Jesus could do, according to the Quran, that Muhammad could not. He was born of a virgin, that's unique, so his birth was unique. He could speak as a child, so his infancy was unique. He was able to take birds and create out of nothing with the power of Allah. That's unique. He was able to give sight to the blind. He was able to heal the lepers. And he was able to resuscitate the dead. In all those categories, Muhammad could not follow suit. So already we see 6 areas that Jesus is superior. And then we end with Surah 19, Ayah 19. In Surah 19, Ayah 19, Gabriel comes to Mary and says, I will give to you a righteous son. What does righteous mean? It means sinless, without sin. Jesus is the sinless one. Uniquely, he is given that title. Only Jesus, according to the Quran, is the sinless one. All the other prophets sinned, but not Jesus. You might say, what about Muhammad? Was not Muhammad also sinless? The answer is very clear. Muhammad sinned as well. Surah 47, Ayah 20, he has to ask forgiveness for his sins. You say, well, that may have happened before he was a prophet. If you go to Surah 48, Ayah 2, you can see very clearly that Muhammad has to ask forgiveness for sins he has done and sins he is yet to do, proving that even as a prophet he continued to sin, but not Jesus, according to the Quran. Now, the Quran is not my authority, but it is the authority for Sami, and it is the authority for you Muslims. Your Quran suggests, in not just one, but 7 different areas, Jesus is superior. Does that mean he's the better model? I would suggest, yes, he is the better model. Because he can do things that Muhammad couldn't even begin to do, that only God could do. Now you might say, okay, what's the reason and why is it that these abilities for Jesus? And the question I would ask you is, why is it that Jesus is given all these abilities if he does nothing after that? He basically just goes up to heaven. What mission did he come to do? And that's a question I've asked many Muslims, and I've never really been satisfied with any real answer. Because if Jesus was given all these unique abilities, and the fact that he was able to do things that only God could do, and we know in our scriptures he didn't do it in the power of God, he did it in his own power. I admit that in the Quran it's very clear that he did it in the power of Allah. That's true, and that's where I would confront that. The question I do ask is, what then? What happens after that? And why would God send such a great man to do so many great things if he just takes him back home again? Obviously something is missing. And what's missing is found in Surah 4, Ayah 157. And Surah 4, 157 destroys everything. One little verse. For they killed him not, they thought it was so, another was given his image, it says in the English translation. For they killed him not. Who is it talking about? Jesus. They killed him not. They thought it was so. Another was given his image. And in that one verse destroys everything I'm about. Everything that I do. In fact, in that one verse, it damns all of us in this room and all of humanity. Because if God did not come to earth, and if God did not die, we are all damned. And we know who that God was. We know that he did come to earth. We know that he did die. But he did stay dead. Friday's here, but Sunday's a coming. Oh, well, it's Sunday. And that's why we celebrate Sunday. That is our day. That is the day he did not stay dead. He died and he rose again. And in that one act, he destroyed everything that Satan had done. Everything that had happened at the very beginning with the first Adam. He came as a second Adam and destroyed what death has done to humanity and what sin has done to humanity. That separation between us and God. What a model. What a man for today. What a man for every day. If the Quran is correct that he did not die, then I have some problems here. I'm going to give you 5 problems right there that I have. Because if God did not die, if Jesus did not die on the cross, then you've got, first of all, you've got a Quranic contradiction, because you have certainly in Surah 19, Ayah 33, where Jesus himself says, blessed be me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I rise again. So even Jesus claims that he dies and rises again. Now many Muslims will say this is a future reference, that he's going to do this when he comes again the second time, and at that point he will die and rise again, but there's no future tense in the Arabic there. And what's more, in verse 15 of that same chapter, John the Baptist says the very same thing. In verse 15 it says, blessed be he, the day he was born, the day he dies, and the day he rises again. Is John the Baptist going to come back in the future? Absolutely not. Surah 3, ayah 55, and in the Arabic, not in the English, not in the translation, they've been very careful not to translate it, but in the Arabic it's mutawafika, that I will kill you and take you to myself. And God is saying of Jesus. So certainly there is an inference or a suggestion that Jesus was going to be killed. But here's the interesting thing, in the English translation, they've taken that out. So there's the first contradiction, internal contradiction, chronic contradiction. Secondly, if Jesus did not die and another took his place, in Surah 53, ayah 38, and in Surah 6, ayah 164, it's very clear that no one can take on the punishment of another. No one can take on the guilt of another. Who is this man, or what was this man doing up on the cross, taking Jesus' place? Taking on his punishment. That's a theological contradiction. What's more, thirdly, what about the eyewitness account? Because or not the eyewitness, let's go beyond it. Let's go to the extra-biblical account. Let's look at the historical account. Let's look at the historians who talk about that event. And there are historians who do talk about that event. We know that Thallus, who was a Greek historian, was having a debate with Phlegon. And the two of them were debating at this time, and around 50 AD, that's 20 years after Christ died, these two were having a debate concerning what happened on the day that Jesus died, saying that the sun went dark and the earth shook. Just 20 years after his death. They were certainly not in any doubt as to who was on the cross. Tacitus, who did not like Christians whatsoever, the great Roman historian, in the late 1st century, not only talks about Jesus' death, he gives us the time when it happened. Tells it happened during the time of Pontius Pilate, during the reign of Tiberius. So we now know that it happened in 33 AD. Now, we don't ask him to accept the significance of that death. What we just ask him is, did Jesus die? Was that Jesus on the cross? And he was in no doubt that that was Jesus on the cross. Josephus, who is a Jewish historian, writing a little later, not only mentions the death of Jesus, but interestingly also refers to the fact that the Christians thought that he rose again. And that's fascinating because this is the only non-biblical reference we have for the resurrection in a Jewish source. So here you have Greek, Roman, Jews, historian, all of them agree that that was Jesus on the cross. The only reference that I know of that talks about someone else is this book right here, the Quran. A book that was written 600 to 700 years later. What about the eyewitness account? Was there anybody there at the cross who would have known whether that was Jesus or not? And we know that it was. John was at the foot of the cross. John was the disciple of Jesus, had known Jesus for 3 years, had known him intimately, had been with him for 3 years. He would have known who was on that cross. But what about his mother? Jesus' mother, Mary, was at the foot of the cross. She had known him for 33 years. Don't you think she would have known her son? Certainly she would have known whether or not that was Jesus or not. And what about the man on the cross? Don't you think he would have said something? Wouldn't you have said something if you were on the cross and you were mistaken and you were not the person that's supposed to have been there? I would have said something. Certainly the man would have said something. We don't hear any reference at all. Look at the last 7 references that Jesus said on the cross. Never trying to get off the cross. Never saying he should be there. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Into your hands I commit my spirit. And then, lastly, the Jesus that I see here, if he did not go on the cross, if he did not die, then what was he doing 3 days later? Going to the upper room, meeting with the 10 disciples, and claiming that it was he. And a week later, when Thomas comes to him and even objects to that, and does not consider who he is, shows him the holes in his hands, the holes in his feet, to prove that it was he that had been on the cross. What kind of prophet would lie like that? Not a prophet that I want to follow. Not a prophet that I see in this life. And what kind of God would take the image, put it on another man, and then not tell anybody for 600 years? And for 600 years tell nobody that actually that wasn't Jesus, it was another man. And then 600 years later suddenly tell another man who is in Arabia who cannot read or write, he tells him the true story. But what about the millions of people that have died for that belief? All the disciples, except for John, were killed for that belief. That's not a God that I want to follow. That's not a kind of God that I see here. That's not a God that I see in this scripture. So let's do a comparison now. Let's go back and let's look at who Jesus and Muhammad are. I've given you a rundown of who I believe Jesus is and who he's not. Let's compare now Jesus with Muhammad. And let's just do a few comparisons between these two men. According to Matthew 1, 18 to 25, and We find that Jesus was born of a virgin, so we already see there's something unique about his birth. We know that Muhammad was born quite normal, according to Ibn Hisham, page 68 and 69. Ibn Hisham is the one who actually gives us the best and the most authoritative biography of the prophet. According to Luke 2, verse 39 to 52, and also Surah 3, ayah 46, both in the Quran and the Bible, that Jesus served God as a child. That he didn't talk according to the Bible, but he served God as a child when he was 12 years old. According to Al-Bukhari, volume 6, 452, Muhammad was an idolater before a prophet. I don't recall that he did serve God before he was a prophet. According to Luke chapter 16 to 21, we read the Bible that Jesus read the Bible early on. According to Surah 7, ayah 157, Muhammad couldn't even read or write. We know that Jesus was very poor. According to Luke chapter 4, verse 16 to 21, and also 8, verse 1 to 3. Whereas we know that Muhammad was quite wealthy, that he took 20% of all the booty from all his raids, according to Ibn Hisham, page 285. We know from Mark 3, verse 9 and 10, and also Surah 3, ayah 49, that Jesus could perform miracles. Muhammad never did one miracle. He basically even said this in Surah 29, ayah 50, when he was asked to do miracles, saying, "Why should I? I'm nothing more than a warner, a messenger." Not much of a defense. According to Surah 18, ayah 35 to 43, Jesus made the blind eyes to see. According to Al-Bukhari, volume 8, says that Muhammad made seeing eyes blind. Jesus made the lame to walk in Matthew 9, verse 2 to 8. Whereas according to Al-Bukhari, volume 8 again, he made the walking lame. Matthew 12, verse 10 to 13 says that Jesus healed withered hands. Bukhari, volume 8 says that he cut off the hands of those who stole. According to volume 8, in the last 3 verses, it even suggests that even for stealing an egg, you could have your hand cut off, according to Muhammad. In John chapter 8, verse 7, Jesus forgave the adulteresses. In Surah 24, ayah 2, we have a reference from the revelation given to Muhammad that it was 100 lashes for the adulterer and the adulteresses. We also have the curious reference to the verse on the Rajam, which is found in Al-Bukhari, that at the time of Muhammad, they were not lashed, they were actually stoned. The adulteresses were stoned. And Umar agonizes when he says, what's going to happen when they read Scripture? Because the prophet stoned, we stoned after him, but now they'll find there's only 100 lashes, and that's what it is today. Jesus forgave the adulterers. John 11, 1 to 45, Jesus raised the dead. Ibn Hisham talked in page 308 in Al-Bukhari in 536-9 talks about Muhammad killing the living. According to Luke 23:34, he excused his opponents. In Bukhari 1, 241 and 5, 248, he killed his opponents. John 8, 1 to 11, he sets the condemned free. Muhammad enslaved the free, according to Ibn Hisham. John 8, 46, Surah 19:19, Jesus was sinless. Muhammad, according to Surah 47:19 and also 48:2, was sinful. Jesus died for sinners, according to John 1:29. Muhammad had sinners killed. Surah 9:5, 47:4, Bukhari 1, and I could go on and on. And then finally, in Luke 23 and 24, Jesus rose from the dead. Muhammad's still dead today. Dead and buried in Medina. So I ask you, who is the greatest? Who's the best model for today? Who's the best man of God for today? I give you Jesus.
Thank you very much indeed, Jay. No, I think we said we'll have no applause. We'll have applause for the speakers right at the end. I think we'll keep it quite fair. I wonder if I could organise ask the organisers if it's possible to get some water for the speakers. They haven't asked for it, but I'm sure they want it. I can do it myself. Is that possible? They got